Hello everybody, this is Luke Reardon from my EDL 850 Mod 12, the case study, final one. So to summarize the case, we're going to establish the facts to begin with. Mr. Keith, that is going to be me in this presentation. He's a principal at St. Regis for 3 years. Mrs. Lynn, librarian media specialist, she's also in charge of the library and computer lab. Mrs. Williams is a St. Regis for many years, so she has been there for a long time, a lot longer than Mrs. Brandon. She has 4 years of experience, but this is her first year at St. Regis. Now, quickly, I'm going to go back up to Mr. Keith, myself, and this Mr. Sample in this presentation, because I did put in parentheses that he is a outsider, and especially coming from a small town, you know that those small town drama things can fly, and bringing in an outsider, especially to people like Mrs. Williams, who have been there for many, many years, may not always take over or be the best impression, or at least to start off with the best impression. So to summarize the case, again, establishing the facts, this is St. Regis. Again, I say this already, but I come from a very small school, and I know that these facts do matter in a study like this, especially when you're trying to maintain relationships. St. Regis is located in a small town. It's a K-8 school. High school students are bused 25 miles once they get to 9th grade. There's 2 teachers in each grade level. There's 420 students total. And as other than the state and federal fundraising that they are federal funds that they get, their fundraising is generally from 2 different things: a candy gift wrap sale and sponsors for a spring fling race, obviously in the spring. So, let's get down to it. The ethical issues and legal issues for this case study. Mrs. Lynn has worked with faculty and staff to prioritize a list of software programs aligned with the instructional objects of multiple grade levels and subjects as possible. Looking into this software, he's talking about CDs, so I'm assuming this time period was early, 2010, maybe 2011, 12, or before that, between 2000 and 2010. So as of now, there was a tech. As of now, this computer lab had a total of 20 computers available for the entire school. All but 3 teachers use labs frequently at scheduled times, and teachers wanted to use new software programs in individual rooms. They got these new software programs implemented into the computers, and they were very beneficial, so they wanted to be able to have these for individual students to individualize their instruction in their own classrooms. So what happened was Mrs. Lynn, she copied CDs for individual use, knowingly violating copyright laws. I put a question mark because it was never clear in the case study as if at the time Mrs. Lynn knew this was a copyright infringement. That's why I put a question mark there. So, report any legal or ethical issues as far as I can look at. So Mr. Sample, he is worried about his reputation, because it did talk about at the beginning of the case study how it, after 3 years of being there, it helped, he saw he had a lot more positive responses than in his first year. Mrs. Lynn broke copyright violations. She uses Mr. Sample's reputation as leverage. Now this is important. Mr. Sample is an outsider, like I talked about before, and he is worried about his reputation, and it seems like he is building a very positive reputation, and something like this could very quickly in a small town dump that into the garbage. So Mrs. Brandon, she reports the problem to Lynn first, which I do think is important. She talked to Lynn, and it seemed that, I'll talk about later, but it seemed that Mrs. Lynn kind of took offense to a new, younger teacher telling her a problem that she had. Mrs. Williams, she received CD knowingly. She obviously knew she was receiving a CD, but it still, to me, was not clear if not she knew that this was a copyright infringement. So in one sentence, Mrs. Flynn violated copyright laws by copying CDs of a software program for individual classrooms in order to save money. In a small town, this seems to make sense, especially if you're not sure about the copyright laws. Yeah, I'll make CDs, whatever, best for the kids, best for the adults. Let's go ahead and do this. It makes sense to me, as long as, it makes sense as to why she did this, but obviously unknowing about the violate copyright laws. So the facts to synthesize, basically to form my own, or form an opinion, or form a own outcome. It is unknown whether Mrs. Lynn or Mrs. Williams knew at the time they were creating a copyright violation. Taking offense to, it seemed that, like I talked about earlier, it seemed like Mrs. Lynn took offense to a younger/new teacher correcting them. Small town drama. I add that again because I do think it is a factor. The second mistake was made when Mrs. Lynn used students and the PTA to threaten Mr. Samples, my reputation. I thought that's when kind of this study took a turn for the worst. I felt like if Mr. Sample, myself, addressed Mrs. Lynn directly and she did not know what was going on, did not know it was a copyright infringement, then when she'd have stepped back and deleted the CDs, I feel like it would have been a lot less of a, it would be a lot less of a drama-filled situation. But since she instantly decided to threaten, it was a threat. I mean, threatening Mr. Sample with the PTA president, who was helping her copy the CDs, and was also threatening him with the students, saying that this is the best interest for the students. We need to do this for the students. But it's not really a question of students of the PTA. It's a question of morality and ethics. To prioritize the information, copyright violation has occurred by Mrs. Lynn. This is very true. At the time, once again, at the time of copying, she has been informed and still wants to proceed. So she has been informed that she has made a violation, and she still wants to proceed. So that's where this really gets to be a problem. She wants to do that. She's threatening with PTA and students, even if she did not know that she broke a law in the first place. Mr. Sample has intervened with facts, and to throw out even more, the district will be responsible. So that would be on Mr. Sample and the superintendent. So, Miss Brandon, reported problem. District's best interest in mind. This is important, and this is where I kind of want to go with Mrs. Brandon. As myself, as the Mr. Sample, you need to think about the risk that Mrs. Brandon took, especially as a first-year teacher in this district. She already did basically this case study with herself, but she approached Mrs. Lynn one-on-one before she went and told the principal, which I think is a strong thing for Mrs. Brandon to do instead of just going straight to the principal. So all the relationships that may be broken, all the relationships I talk about later in this presentation with the PTA, with the community, with Mrs. Lynn, are already being stretched for Mrs. Brandon, because Mrs. Brandon already did these things. So all these relationships are already being stretched. So as the principal, I would need to ask myself, I'm going to lose Miss Brandon, who obviously has the best district. He has the best interest for the district in mind. I don't want to lose the trust of her and people like her. So that is important, I do believe. So Mrs. Williams, still unknown if aware of a violation, as from what I could read. I don't know if Mrs. Lynn and her tend to talk or whatever, but it is unclear. So I'm going to kind of leave her out of the majority of the rest of this presentation. So I'm going to identify the options and possible consequences. These are the options for myself. The first one, or the third one's not really an option, but I'm going to throw it in there. So the third one, to agree with Mrs. Lynn and take the savings for the students and go ahead and risk everything happening. Option one, take a firm stance and order her destroy copies and not make any more. Option two, destroy copies and contact software company to report. And we're going to go through the pros and cons of the evaluation of each one. So the option one, take a firm stance and order her destroy copies and not make any more, and then let that be the end of it. Pros, it violation no longer occurring at the time. But it also, as far as relationships and the general ethics go, it establishes that cannot be bought type of persona, which I think is important as a leader. People will walk all over you if you give an inch, they'll take a mile. People will walk all over if you do give an inch. So, cons, relationships with faculty, staff, and community. This, I threw that in there. Once again, goes with the ethics and goes with that persona. It's going to stretch some relationships, especially with Mrs. Lynn. It's going to the rest of the staff who have been there a very, very long time. Everyone who works in a school system knows that those people who have been in a district forever kind of tend to work together, while the new people seem to kind of work together or communicate a little more, and you don't want last thing you want is to get caught up in the middle of that and have those two butting heads. So in the community, I threw the community in there, the stakeholders. I'm thinking specifically the PTA. Obviously, Mrs. Lynn and the PTA president are friends. In other words, the PTA member probably wouldn't be in there helping her make copies. I don't know if the PTA member knows this is a violation, but it would stretch some, just because of the friendships that these people have together, it would stretch some more relationships. And to add, once again, the principal is Mr. Sample, myself, is still relatively new to the district. Known infringements has taken place and not reported. So no infringements has taken place and not reported. That could come back to bite you later on. So evaluation. So number 2, destroy copies and contact software company to report. This is probably my favorite option. So pros: no more infringements of copyright. Covered the possibility of being reported in the future. Established: cannot be bought. Persona, again, is important. And cons: relationships with faculty, staff, and community. Once again, like I talked about in the last option, software company could sue for violations. And this is important because the district will be liable. And it seems we are already sending all of our 9th through 12th graders 25 miles to the nearest city. So it is important. Obviously, it's a financial situation, so it's important to protect the districts from a possible lawsuit. The last one, agree with Mrs. Flynn and take the save. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. So yeah, you'll save money, hopefully, as long as nobody finds out. Student teachers get to use it as they wanted. That's very positive. Students and teachers can benefit from this. Relationships with select faculty, staff, and community will remain intact, specifically with Mrs. Lynn. But again, you're going to hurt your relationships with those people who did already take the risk, like Mrs. Brandon. So she already put that out there, and I feel like she already put that risk out there. So I feel like as a principal, it says to people that you are going to side with the people who have been in the community for a long time, even though it is in the wrong. And I don't think that's a good thing. So the cons: can be bought relationships. Again, that's your persona. Lost trust from Miss Brandon, talked about that a second ago, and discovered and sued for copyright violation. My best option would be number 2, destroy copies in order no more be made. Contact software company, inform what has happened, and figure out cost to acquire rights. That's what I would do as the option. So I'm imagining implementing this decision. I would talk to Mrs. Lynn to educate her on my plan in case contacted by software company. Reflectively evaluate the situation. And I'd also educate her as to why this is my decision. Whether she agrees with it or not, I would like to be told why. If I am being contradicted from somebody above me, I would contact the software company to inform of violations in the situation, and I'd ask for possible rights and what that would entail to get the rights for the students. And then I would have a staff meeting. I'd inform staff as to what has happened. I would leave Lynn out of it, but educate as to why I decided what I decided. And then I would try to get some feedback from my own staff as to what they would have done after knowing all the information. This also helps because they would be, in a small town, the drama would be less because they would know all the facts and what I decided, why I decided what. So it is important that they don't just spread out all the gossip and all the misinformation. You directly tell them why you did what you did with the facts that you had.